A very good evening to you, and many thanks for staying with us on this extended version of Kivumbi 2017. My name is Sharon Momanyi, and in studio I shall be having a conversation with Abdikadir Mohammed, who is Senior Advisor to the President and Head of Legislation and Constitutional Affairs. Many thanks for joining me this evening. We also have Moses Otieno Kajwang, who is the Senator for Homa Bay. Very welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
So very long day we've had today,
yes.
Very eventful day we've had
indeed.
today. And I'll just begin with you, Abdikadir. The President seemed to anticipate legal challenges to that declaration of his win today. What are your options? What are you expecting legally moving forward?
Thanks, Sharon. And as you said, it's a key milestone in the path towards our electoral process. We had an election on the 8th of August. We had an annulment of that election on the 1st of September. We had a proposed 17th date, change of that date by the IEBC to the 26th. And then we had a fresh presidential election on the 26th. And then a couple of days for the IEBC to go through the processes. And today, the president was declared president-elect. So that's a very... a process that's very well laid down in the Constitution.
Right.
In most elections, and in most countries' presidential elections, then the president assumes office, and anybody who has an issue. And in fact, even us, in the previous Constitution, former President Moi would then, once the IEBC declared you a winner, would take office. And if you had a petition, just like in our parliamentary system or governance system, or the Senate, for example, if you were declared elected, you would assume office. You would be sworn in. Anybody who has any problem would then go to court. They have 28 days to go to court. For the presidential election, we have a different system. The president doesn't assume office. He or she waits for 7 days in case somebody has an issue with his election.
Right.
And that person would go to court. Now, if they go to court, then there's a limited period within which the Supreme Court can handle that. So the president was saying, any voter or any of his opponents has the right to go to court.
Right.
And he has to wait for 7 days for that opportunity to be exhausted. If that doesn't happen, which is highly unlikely because we're a very litigious country, then so be it. If it happens, again, it's a very lawful, legitimate process, and the matter will end up in the Supreme Court. So the president was saying he is grateful for the win, he's grateful for the re-election. He is thankful that the country has gone through this hump. Many countries don't do this, and I think we as a country really don't celebrate our wins. Whether you oppose the president or oppose the process or not, there are very many countries that have never had a peaceful transfer of power from one president to a second administration or from one president to the other, including some of our neighbors, by the way. So it's really a wonderful milestone for our constitutional development.
Right. And Senator, even before we talk about NASA's options going forward, let's begin by talking about the objective of the national resistance movement, a baby that was born on the eve of this repeat presidential poll. What is that objective of this movement, and how does it feed into NASA's manifesto?
Thank you, Sharon. In my culture, there's a saying which, if I try to interpret in English, would loosely say, you do not relieve yourself in the house because it's dark, because the day will break and you'll be found out. And that's a situation that we find ourselves in as a country. We have done certain things. Abdikadir is quite proud that we have gone through, we've done an election, whether it was a proper election, whether it was uchaguzi bora or bora uchaguzi, we have done something. But surely, day will break. And that is when we'll be asking ourselves, what kind of election did we have? What kind of baby has it produced? Is it legitimate or illegitimate? The resistance movement that we talked about a few days when we were at Uhuru Park was born out of the frustration that a cross-section of the population had with the impunity of the governing coalition, which is Jubilee, and the intransigence of other independent bodies that were supposed to be the watchguards of the common man. If you look at this so-called election, you've got 7 million or so, that's what people say, we have enough evidence to show that the numbers were embellished and the numbers were padded significantly to indicate that there was a high voter turnout. But even if you took, we will demonstrate that. And even if you took it at 7.4 million and took that as a percentage of registered voters, it is just slightly above 40%. So you've got 60% of voters that stayed away and decided not to exercise their right to vote. One would argue that you never get 100% voter turnout, but it's still telling that 60% of voters didn't participate. 7 million out of 40 million Kenyans, or close to 50 million Kenyans, is a very small percentage of people who should not make you proud to say that you had a mandate. So when we talked of resistance, we said that we have tried to do things the conventional manner. We have tried to do things legally. We went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gave orders, very express orders, and said that whatever we do in the fresh elections, it must be in strict compliance with the Constitution and with existing laws. What Abdikadir advised the President to do was to change the law when the game was on. An expression and a sign of bad faith. Using a majority in Parliament.
He said today that he actually did not...
Well, he just said it today. But remember, Sharon, that if the President does not return the law back to Parliament, in effect, within 14 days, it is law, probably, unless you're talking about Gazette. So we have tried to do things legally. We have tried to achieve certain things through the legislature, and we realize that at every point, the executive is ahead of us and they're erecting roadblocks. We have decided that the Constitution allows the people the right to express themselves. The power that we enjoy as senators, as president, and as advisors to the president, that power derives from the people. Our resistance must not be seen as a military approach. And I think that's where we get it wrong. That when we talk resistance, people are thinking of the national resistance movement where Yoweri Museveni and Ria Ketegai and others went to the bush. What Gandhi did in India.
Movements really across the world have not been without violence. So what assurance and how are you planning to ensure that whatever tactics, which you have not explicitly shared with us, that the NRM will be using, will be devoid of violence?
Sharon, Martin Luther King was not a violent person. In fact, he suffered violence in the hands of the oppressors. The people he was protesting against subjected him to violence and killed him. Mahatma Gandhi never used violence. In fact, he used some means that were very creative, including allowing people to relieve themselves in the public so that they could drive away the British who had so-called superior manners. There are many ways, and that's why Raila Odinga says there are many ways of killing a cat. There are many ways of engaging in resistance without resorting to violence. Because at the end of the day, no one wants to run a broken country. Even if we are to ascend to leadership, we don't want to have a country like Somalia. But what we are seeing is that the kind of impunity, intransigence. Sharon, just listen to the president's speech today. He says there was witchcraft in these campagns. He needs to tell us.
Well, some politicians actually from your party are on record as talking about and invoking the use of witchcraft in dialect. But we'll get to that later. And Abdikadir, we want to talk about the legitimacy of this election. And it's a question that has really been discussed at length. And we know for sure that this election met all the legal thresholds required. But one would argue that legitimacy is not a legal aspect, but a political aspect. That 62% of registered voters did not participate in this process.
But I like... let's first of all start with what you started with. Legitimacy is both political and legal. First is the legal, because it's more critical in terms of the legal legitimacy. That requirement, as you said, clearly was met. The second is political. This particular election is part of a process. It's part of the first election. It didn't just start from, it's not a general election. In the first election, we had 15 million out of 19 million voting. That went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, through again lawful process, sent back the election back to the people. In this second election, the president got 90% of what he got the last time. In fact, in certain places like Kisii and Nyamira, he actually got more than he got in the first election. So he's got exactly the same, almost slightly less, the same as what he got the last time. Number one. Number two, he's got the second highest vote for a presidential candidate ever in this country. He got more than Raila Odinga, who was his main opponent, got in the last time. Number three other things happened. Number one is the second most popular candidate pulled out. That reduces the number of people who will want to go to the election. Mm-hmm. Number two, it was therefore fairly obvious that the president had a fresh run. Mm-hmm. That again reduced the intensity of the election. Right. Number three, there was, and this is really critical for the media, because you seem to give our good friends in NASA a pass on this for no reason. There was intimidation, and there was violence, and there was actual stoppage of election in 25 constituencies, expressly by NASA, through violence and intimidation. And you have to ask these good people. My colleague here talked very nicely about intransigence and the fact that they want to change the country for the better. How do you change the country for the better? By destroying property belonging to IEBC. Individuals who want to train other individuals so they have the opportunity to vote. This is the basis for democracy. When you are going to stop IEBC from operating, nobody will ever be forced to vote. Nobody will hold a gun to the head of anybody and say, go into this booth and vote for Uhuru Kenyatta. But because our constitution requires an election to take place, because the court said there should be an election on this date, because IEBC determined that it's going to be the 26th, IEBC is free to set up its infrastructure in Kisumu, in Mandera, in Mombasa. What happened to IEBC in Kisumu? They were stopped by violent means, by youth using violent means, not peaceful Martin Luther or Mahatma Gandhi style protest, by violent means, by banning, by destruction processes. Now, then you turn around and say, by the way, you didn't have the numbers. Of course you didn't have the numbers, because partly of what you did, which is exactly the same strategy NASA used the last time. Through protest by the Honorable, our former Prime Minister, the Honorable Raila Odinga, IEBC was disbanded barely a year to the elections. This was expressly contrary to the opinion of Kriegler, that we should not disband our IEBC or make major changes a few months to the elections. Why was it done? Precisely because the Honorable Raila knew then the new team might not have the capacity to run a perfect election. Then you have a myriad of electoral-related cases, hundreds of them, all sponsored by NASA, including one by Maina Kiai that happened about 30 days to the elections. That changes the landscape completely. And then when you have put all these roadblocks in front of the IEBC, you come around and say, by the way, you're not running a perfect election. You run a business and a professional setup here. If I put roadblocks in front of you every bit of the way, and then I come around, by the way, you have not done this, and then I want to benefit from that. That is wrong, and that should not be accepted, because that's exactly what the game NASA is playing, and you good people in the media help them do that.
All right. And
where is the legitimacy when there are only 7 million? When they have very actively stopped people from going to the vote, when they have withdrawn from the vote, when this is a second, when this is essentially a fresh election, is essentially a form of rerun.
They stopped that whole political.
You can't have your cake and eat it.
too. And I want to bring in the senator here. What Abdikadir is saying is what many have termed as, patriotic insubordination by, you guys, NASA, in the sense that you stopped this process. You asked for it, then stopped for it, stopped your supporters from participating in it, and then now calling it illegitimate.
Well, Sharon, I'm surprised that the guys who are changing the rules of the game a week to elections can be telling us about Kriegler today. The guys who are sending police to kill people in areas that are seen as opposition strongholds could be telling us about Kriegler today. Correct, but let me get to the point. And Sharon, I disagree with you on some point where you say that the legal threshold has been achieved. Really not there yet, because the Constitution says an election shall be held in all the 290 constituencies.
Yes.
And that is a matter that will end up in court for interpretation, because the elections were not held throughout the country. What we are succeeding in doing is to Balkanize this country.
And the case that has been put forward, Senator, on that
apart.
point of the 290 constituencies, that there was effort, there was intent to have this election take place in all, including the 25 constituencies that did not participate, that there was violence, you know, the electoral officials were stopped from participating and erecting this election. In that case, and this was actually seen.
Sharon, I think we are taking a very shallow perspective to it. Why did the people of Kisumu and Homa Bay and Siaya and Migori, for example, and people in Nairobi become hostile to the presence of police? These all started on 8th of August. After the first election, which was annulled, when the results were declared, I personally went to Kibra, where people were already fighting and police had gone into Kibra and they had barricaded certain parts of it. They didn't allow us. When we went there, they clobbered us and chased us away. They were killing people there. In other parts of the country, human rights organizations have put the toll at slightly less than 100. The police denies that they don't kill anybody. In fact, the police are saying that NASA has been killing their supporters to gain sympathy. The most irresponsible kind of statement you can get from people whose job is to safeguard and guarantee law and order. So the history to this is that the people of these areas have been profiled, they've been targeted, they've been killed without any due consideration to their right to peaceful protest and demonstrations. This has given birth to a hostility where the government that was supposed to provide a secure environment for IEBC to conduct an election got it wrong. They sent truckloads and truckloads of police and military officials and people who appeared to be members of militia, because the manner in which they were behaving and attacking people was beyond anything formal that policemen are supposed to subscribe to. So we must look at it from that perspective, that you have a people who had already been killed and crushed, a people who had been made to be hostile to any excessive police presence. And that is what had been manifested. Now, Sharon, just to finalize on that.
All right.
So we have a situation where a winner has been declared, and we have not been told when these areas are going to have that privilege or exercise their constitutional right to carry out an election. I think that is wrong, because what it is telling us is that we can go on without you. And what will follow? The
chairman said that it would be inconsequential to the overall results.
Sharon, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That is the kind of tyranny that we want to run away from. You know, Sharon, just one final point on that. That's the kind of tyranny we have to run away from. We cannot have a situation where it does not matter whether you vote or not. You know what's going to follow? When it comes to resource allocation, you will be told that you didn't vote for us, you didn't even vote, so fend for yourself. That is what the people of those areas should expect.
You know, as a legal and constitutional affairs advisor to the president, we have seen excessive use of force by police.
Yes, but you know, the good senator didn't answer your question. You asked him, why did you stop the IEBC, or why did his party push for the violent intimidation of IEBC officials so that the people in those particular constituencies could have an opportunity to vote? It's not the police who conduct elections. It's IEBC officials, oftentimes locals. So that is the reason why we didn't have elections in those places, because very violently and through intimidation, the IEBC was stopped from conducting elections. They attempted a second time. They put a date a couple of days later. Again, what did we say? Very strongly. Not young people making noises, governors of counties, very senior politicians saying there will be no election in this place. Then you come around. Isn't it very cynical? Then you come around and say, why didn't you hold elections here? I have no doubt in my mind the IEBC will be extremely happy to hold elections. Why would the IEBC not want to hold elections in Kisumu or Siaya? Ask yourself, what would be the reason? Now, let me come to the issue of legitimacy. Finally, on the political legitimacy. The political legitimacy does not just depend on that particular election. There were 6 elections in the general elections. We had the MCS. We have elected all our MCS. Jubilee has the majority. There is less than 10% of those wards that are under election petitions. So 90% of the MCAs will be settled. We have members of the Senate We have, and Jubilee has a majority. We have members of the National Assembly, and Jubilee has a majority. We have county governors, and the Jubilee has a majority. All those build to political legitimacy. Finally, on the issue of police action. How come we don't have police brutality in one area and we have police action in the other area? You see, when you carry stones...
Some have called it ethnic profiling.
Exactly.
Absolutely not. Actually,
exactly.
the people who...
Genocide.
The people who are... You know, it's not good to throw around these terms. These are serious terms. They are people who have suffered genocide. And they'll be laughing at you if you... They'll actually be feeling very bad.
All right, so maybe you give us the answer to your question. Why is this happening in just
So the point is,
areas?
if there are people who actually are the silent heroes of this process of ours, they are security forces. This country has been on high alert for almost a year. We have gone through a very difficult election process. We have, right across our doorstep, a very difficult war we are fighting. Those young people are young Kenyans, men and women. They are suffering every night to keep the peace. We have a group of people who are intent on stoning them. You know, they are young police officers who are in hospital. Any particular death of any Kenyan in this country is a tragedy. But you cannot be throwing stones at the police station and expect the police will not react. You cannot be carrying... Have you seen the equipment?
But the question has been...
Have you
of
seen
course
the equipment?
Yes. You expect the police to react. But the question has been that they respond in a disproportionate manner.
That should not happen. And we have IPOA, not an institution that shies away from criticizing the police or that sides with the police. It's a very independent institution. We created it specifically because of that problem we have. Why don't you wait for that institution to come and say, this police officer or that other police officer used excessive force? The senator is not bothered. He has already made up his mind because it builds into his narrative very nicely. There is police brutality. We have been targeted. We have not been allowed to give to take part in the elections. Sham elections have been conducted. It is a very nice song. But unfortunately, this song is getting tired now. The country needs to move. We have had an election. We have had a second election. Anybody who has an issue, please go to court.
Right.
Let's go through those processes.
Right.
Even the demonstrations and the resistance, so long as it's by lawful means, we have no problem. Please demonstrate. Demonstrations and rioting are separate. If you riot, that's not a demonstration. Let me ask you a question, Sharon. In the demonstrations we have been happened in your offices, how happy would you be if you are a business person in the CBD of Nairobi and you have those riots taking place every day? Don't you have a constitutional right, just like this person who is rioting? Why is it that your constitutional right to riot, because there's no such a right actually, it's a right to picket and demonstrate, overrides the other party's right to drive safely on the roads of Nairobi, to have a business in the CBD in Nairobi, to run their lives the way they want? Why are you insisting on disrupting everybody else? Why not demonstrate the way you want to demonstrate? Why not take part in the elections? If you don't want to take part in the elections, why not let the IBC set up its infrastructure and not vote?
All right, and just before we go on break, because I want to come back with the Senator, on that issue of police use of force and excessive force for that matter, the unfortunate sidelines to it is that we have seen children dying. We've seen civilians dying.
And you have proved that it's the police who killed that child? You, Sharon, have proved that that person was killed, that she was killed by the police?
Who is this who kills people wantonly? And we've got a state. So who is this who's killing Kenyans?
Any person killed in this country is killed by the police. Sharon, you actually want to say on national TV that young... Isn't it important?
Are you aware of the case of Baby Pendo?
Absolutely. Why don't you let the process... Yes, why don't you let the process take place? So that
what process? Investigations?
Yeah, absolutely. There has... You have decided, you have concluded it is X person. So who did the killing, if you know, Sharon?
Sharon, I think before we go to the break, Sharon, it would be important.
It is important for the police, for the same.
No.
Those of us like the senator who are very easy to jump and say so and so has a right, to understand that every other Kenyan, including the police, have a right. If there is a claim that there is police violence, there is absolutely no law that allows for destruction of property by the police. There are procedures and protocols on how police use force. they are also an independent institution whose business is nothing else but to investigate complaints against the police. Then we have lawful process to do that after the conclusion. Otherwise, we'll have mob justice.
I just wanted to let you off that before we finish, because on Saturday night I hosted the State House spokesman, and he did not distance or refuse or actually question the children having died out of the police using of force. He just said that it's not the president's work to agitate, to reach out, and it necessarily does not fall in his docket.
No.
That was the State House spokesman.
That's okay. If you have proof that it is the police that have done that, let's have it. We'll take immediate action. But there has to be a process. It is not because Sharon said that this person has killed this other person, then that person is then taken to the gallows. Otherwise, we'll be a lawless society. If the police have used excessive violence, there is a procedure for disciplining police officers. And there's an independent institution whose business is to do that. But you really can't pick information from social media.
It's not from social media. We had our reporters who are on the ground following this up. And we really need to go on break now. But I'll come back with you, Senator, because I know you have a reaction to that. But ultimately, the goal of this conversation we're having, both of us, is to know collectively how are we moving forward as a country. Are there issues we need to address and how we need to do that? So we're taking a short break here. Don't go too far. We still have a lot to discuss when we come back.